Welcome to Raidercast. This episode is sure to be a treat, and especially for big fans of the Reboot series. Please welcome the award-winning writer who helped shape a generation of Tomb Raider, Rhianna Pratchett. Rhianna Pratchett, welcome to Raidercast.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Very, very excited to chat about some Tomb Raider with you.
Yeah, me too. It's been a while since I talked about Tomb Raider, but I'm always happy to talk about Lara and her adventures.
Wonderful. For a little bit of an introduction, for some of the listeners who might not know too much about who you are or your relationship with the series, please could you introduce yourself?
Okay, well, my name is Rhianna Pratchett. As you said, I'm a writer and narrative designer for video games, comics, film, TV, short stories, novels, pretty much everything, really. I've been working in the games industry for over 20 years. And what we're talking about today will be the work that I did on the reboot of Tomb Raider in 2013 and its sequel, Rise of the Tomb Raider, which came out in 2015.
So let's begin with some of the questions. Going back to the very start, what was your history with and your thoughts of Tomb Raider before your time with Crystal Dynamics?
So I played the original Tomb Raider because I think pretty much everyone has played the original Tomb Raider and really enjoyed it. I'm pretty sure my dad played it first because I think it was like the stage in my life where my dad was sort of getting the video games and playing it himself, and then I was allowed to play them. Like we never got 2 copies, we got 1 and it was passed down to me. And then he spoiled the T-Rex coming around the corner in the valley moment because he was so excited about what had happened that he came in to tell me all about it.
Oh, amazing.
Which is very sweet, but it ruined it slightly. And so yeah, I played the first game. I think I played a little bit of the second game, and I think Dad, I think he maybe finished 2. I don't know if he played 3, but he used to talk about the computer games he played in interviews, and he'd say things like, oh yeah, I've had many happy hours following Lara Croft's bottom around. Don't sexualize Lara, Dad, don't, that's just weird. No. So I think he played it for a little bit longer than I did, and I think I just sort of I wasn't a big fan, as I've talked about, of the marketing of the original Lara, and it kind of put me off as a younger gamer. I didn't really like the way that she was sexualized in the marketing, and not so much sexualized, but this kind of nudge, wink, wink, your girlfriend will be jealous of you playing with Lara kind of vibe to it, which I thought was a bit kind of even it felt archaic at that time, an attitude like why is it only men that are going to play this? I mean, it didn't seem to acknowledge how popular she was with women, or how popular she was going to become with women, and it just kind of put me off. And back then, I think it only takes a little thing to put you off things, and there were plenty of other games to play, so I sort of stopped playing it around then and just went on to other things, and I made my first contact in the games industry at the launch of Tomb Raider 3, because I think my dad, I don't know if he played it, but he was invited to the launch of it, which was in the Natural History Museum, which is a great place to launch a Tomb Raider game.
Fantastic.
And we were sitting at the table with the reviews editor of PC Gear, which was a new magazine coming out, and it was the sort of sister magazine to PC Zone, where about a year or so later I got my first full-time job in the industry.
Oh, that's really exciting. That's really cool.
Yeah, in a nutshell, I played 1 and a bit of 2.
Fantastic. When the Tomb Raider reboot was beginning to happen, you were handed the responsibility of reinventing Lara Croft, and that must have been such a daunting challenge. What were your initial thoughts, and what inspired you as you began to write her story?
I don't think it felt as daunting at the start, because no one knew, and so there was no it wasn't public, so it was all kind of behind the scenes. And I'd been working for another Square Enix studio. I was working with Eidos Montreal, and I got recommended by the producer of the game I was working on to Tim Longo, it was at the time, who was sort of heading up the team there with Noah Hughes. And I did some interviews with them. I wrote some test scenes, and was offered the job. And it felt great, and it felt the right trajectory for me, because I'd worked a lot on female protagonists in the past, and I'd worked on Rico and Kai in Heavenly Sword.
I absolutely love that game.
Yeah, I have a lot of love for Heavenly Sword. It was really fun to work on, and also Faith in Mirror's Edge. So it felt like, yeah, this is where it's all been leading to. But ultimately, it's a team thing. When you're dealing with AAA games this big, it's a team effort. So I never felt like I was on my own, even though I was on my own for a while, until we got John Stafford. So it was kind of me and for a little while Tim, until Tim left, and Noah, and just sort of working with, you know, what the ideas the team had, and the things that were in place, and the things that needed to be kind of built out, looking at Lara's background, her relationships, the kind of her progression through the game, the kind of narrative beats, that sort of thing, and just like fleshing everything out and kind of bringing it all together. So it didn't really feel that daunting until I got like my name out there, but by then I pretty much done all the work. So it was good that it happened that way. So I didn't feel a lot of pressure until then, and by then it was almost finished pretty much.
Well, that's really good. That's really good.
That was nice that it happened that way around. And you know, by the time I got my name out there, obviously we were dealing with the little kerfuffle maybe that came out about the kind of trailer and the comments that were said. And so I was kind of announced exactly when I was supposed to be announced. There was no like quickly roll out to Rhianna to kind of deal with this. It was more like but that's kind of what I sort of was parachuted into the middle of this kind of minor uproar that had happened about the trailer and the things that had been said about Lara and the idea of protecting her and things like that, which hadn't come from me and hadn't come from another narrative person, but it was something that I kind of dealt with and talked about openly and sort of tried to create a discussion about and bring a little bit more clarity as to what was actually in the game and why we put it in there.
Cool. What sort of things inspired you as you were writing Lara's character?
I mean, I've always been a big fan of Buffy, and I really like the way that it kind of deals a lot with the hero and the human in Buffy, like what it means to be a superhero when you've got friends who aren't superheroes and they have to rely on you and you're always the one that has to save them. Lara's not a superhero, but she is kind of. She's like a half superhero in kind of gaming terms.
She's got a fierceness about her.
Yeah, I really liked sort of digging into that, and there's a lot of drama and conflict, and also she was quite young. She was only 21. It was her first expedition. I could kind of play with the naivety that you have in that age, and how that you feel like, you know what the world is like, and then you kind of get into the world and it's very different. And so I really kind of enjoyed playing with that, and the idea of her being massively out of her depth and actually having to rise to the challenge. But Buffy was a bit of an influence, and films like The Descent as well, which was already an influence for Crystal visually in particular.
Oh yeah, you could absolutely see that in parts of the game for sure.
Yeah, definitely, and I was quite impressed that Crystal had even seen this cult.
It's a bit niche, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's had much more wider appeal. Since then, it's kind of really caught on, but at the time it was still fairly niche. So I was quite impressed that they'd seen it and were referencing it.
Cool. Right back from that beginning, were you given any pointers from Crystal Dynamics, any sort of do this or don't do that, limitations imposed on a character? Sort of how much did they direct you when you were writing?
Not a lot at the start. It was more limitations or restrictions came in as we were going along, in a kind of, no, we don't want to do that, or we want to do this. Like, there weren't ones at the start. They kind of happened as we went through, as we were kind of designing and writing stuff. So there was a fairly blank slate when I came in. As I said, there was a whole bunch of kind of ideas, of visuals. The team knew how the game was going to play, knew what kind of game it was, and there was a little bit of bio stuff on, I think, Lara, Roth, and maybe Sam.
Okay.
There was obviously the setting, the idea of using Himiko was in there, and a kind of few other bits and pieces, which is normally what you would expect coming in as a freelance writer. You get a whole kind of mishmash of artwork and ideas and level design that you have to kind of fashion into a story. So that was kind of what I was working with to start with, and sort of just fleshing out everything, and her relationships in particular, and her background. And Crystal were very open to my thoughts, and it felt like we were quite on the same page. And as we went along, we sort of ended up folding more classical stuff in, like the twin pistols, for example, like Croft Manor, her father, that kind of thing. So we sort of there was a kind of on the fly and quite organic process coming up with kind of all the ideas and choosing what we were going to bring in from the classic games and kind of ideas we were going to work with.
Cool. Were there any aspects of the story, or maybe even different versions of the story, that didn't really make it past the early development around the time when you joined, that maybe you were a bit sad that you couldn't take further?
I'm struggling to remember them on Tomb Raider, but there were on Rise, like early ideas that John and I particularly wanted to deal with, was the PTSD Lara would likely be suffering after the first game.
I remember that was hinted at quite a bit in the trailer for Rise as well.
Yeah, it was, and that was originally where we wanted to go, and have her actually being a bit more kind of out of control and just not quite able to cope with the real world. Now she basically had the blinkers taken off her eyes, and she'd seen that there are secrets in the world that she hadn't anticipated, and they changed her life, and now she's sort of back in reality. And she's had a hugely traumatic experience. She's had to take human lives. She's seen her friends die. It's some rough shit that she goes through, and we really thought that would kind of impact on her kind of mental state, and maybe what she would decide to do next. And there are even ideas being thrown around, like almost playing through parts of the first game that had become twisted in her mind, like you were playing almost her nightmares of the first game.
Oh, that's a great idea.
But that kind of got thrown out, and Crystal went, some people at Crystal weren't big fans of that, so it kind of went the direction it did. So I think that's probably the main one that I miss, I think. There are always so many casualties for narrative when you're making a game. You never know what you have to be super flexible when you write, because you never know what you're going to be asked to do next. It could be like, I've had games where they've just cut out the third act because they've run out of budget and time, so they've just cut the third act, and I've had to find a way of ending it on the second act. Or in the case of Tomb Raider, what I call death drafts. So they would decide to kill off certain characters for gameplay reasons, not narrative reasons, and I'd have to go back and kill them in the script, and and then remove them from scenes. It's quite emotional, because I got attached to these characters, and then I would have to go back and kill them. It was yeah, it was a little traumatic for me, actually.
Were there any of those that spring to mind that you can tell us about?
I mean, I'm trying not to spoil if you played the game, you know who dies. So I'm trying not to spoil that. But I will tell you, originally when the first draft of the script, the characters that died did not die. And the fact that characters died actually, and I think this is genuinely very interesting, and it sort of points to how gameplay has an impact on narrative tone, because originally the ending was kind of darker and not as upending as it was at the time, but there hadn't been this like continual cavalcade of death happening. So the characters, I think maybe Roth's death was still in there, but you didn't have, sorry, spoiler alert.
Don't worry, I'll put one at the start.
Said that before. But the other characters who died weren't in there, and the more characters who died, the more dark and depressing the game became narratively, and so we ended up actually having to change the ending, and it being more of an up positive ending, because everything had been quite dark since then, up until then, whereas it wasn't originally intended to be, so we could get away with a darker ending because the whole game hadn't been quite as dark. But once the gameplay changed the narrative tone, we ended up having to change the ending to make it a little bit more positive.
Cool. What was your original sort of darker ending for that game?
Well, I'm assuming people have like, I just assume people have played it. So Sam didn't make it, and were at the ending, and I'm now struggling because obviously it's been the ending we have has kind of overwritten in my head the ending that was, but so I think I can't remember whether she'd sacrificed herself or she was just too far gone, and Lara had to kill her to stop Himiko coming into the world. And so it was all that was, and I'm kind of glad that we didn't, because I think there's been a lot of fun that we've had since, particularly in the comics with the Sam and Lara relationship.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of glad it didn't happen that way. I
think a lot of the fans are too.
Yeah, it would have been. I think we would have definitely lost something had we gone in that direction. The only thing I wish is that we'd known sooner that the ending would be changed, because it was almost quite last minute, so we didn't have as much time to finesse things as we would have liked. But that's the only regret I think I have.
Talking a little bit about Lara's character for the reboot, a wonderfully famous line from that game was, "I'm not that kind of Croft." So for you, what was that kind of Croft? What are the fundamentally important facets of her character, and the ones that you wanted?
This is going to spoil things a bit. I didn't really know at the time I wrote that line. So I wrote that line in my audition. And I think I had in my head that, like, the sense that I can't remember, it may have been in her bio that her dad had lots of archaeological adventures, and so and I kind of wrote that line as a kind of almost off the cuff line.
I think it's a brilliant
as
theme.
Part of this before, like, I'd even got the job, and it was one of the lines that actually, I don't know whether it survived because they particularly liked it, or it survived because it was already written, and I think they made it into the demo, and I think it had been made and they were happy with it, so it sort of survived. It survived right through to the end game. So yeah, when I wrote it, I didn't have a great sense of meaning, just like it felt realistic for how Lara was feeling at the time, what little I knew of her father. It's the same with I Hate Tombs as well, which was just meant to be a throwaway, silly, ironic line that was written for a little trailer, and it suddenly gets carried through to the main game, so there's always like funny little bits like that.
I think I'm Not That Kind of Croft it sums that game up so well, because it's basically a blank slate, and it's giving her a launch platform to begin from, and I think it fits so well, and it's probably why I think it's one of the most iconic lines of that game.
Yeah, it's funny that it sort of came out in that way, but that's just how things go. And actually, some of the successful projects I've worked on when I've gone on to get the job, it's actually some of the stuff I've written in my kind of audition pieces actually made it into the final game. There's the same with Overlord. There was, I think my audition piece ended up being the intro cinematic to the game. But yeah, I think it was just me kind of grappling for a sense of things, and it just felt right at the time.
Cool. How did you go about developing her character between Tomb Raider and Rise of the Tomb Raider? Like, were there any new aspects of the character that the sequel let you write that maybe you weren't sure about in the first game?
Certainly in the comics, I got to be a little light with Lara's character. So actually going back to what you were saying about things I wasn't allowed to do. I wasn't really allowed to be funny. I wasn't really allowed to kind of do the witty one-liners and things that Lara is known for, and I kind of missed that because I love doing that sort of thing. It's the kind of more somber Lara is not a choice I made or how I think people have often flagged it up as something they miss. I enjoy doing comedy stuff. I wrote all the Overlord games. It's something I love doing.
Yeah.
But Crystal were kind of quite firm on they didn't want the witty one-liners. They didn't want the kind of sassiness because they felt that it suggested too much confidence, which I understand, which I get. So it suggested that she was too confident, and she wasn't confident. So so she gets a little bit more confident in Rise, and I had a blast writing the comics. In all honesty, obviously Gail Simone wrote the first arc, and Gail and I did the second, and then I did the third, which actually rolled into Rise. And because I was also working on Rise at the time, I knew what was happening in there. So if there's you see Constantine in the end of the comics, things like that. And so that was really fun to do, and I got to have more it was more the Lara I think I would have liked to have put in the game. Like it was a little lighter. There was kind of a bit more about her kind of friendships, relationship with Sam and other characters like Kaz and Grim and Reyes, and just kind of fleshing out her kind of background and making her more human, and also having like really fun sort of swashbuckling style adventures, like being dressed as one of the Bennett sisters, fighting bad guys on the London Underground, or Sam using a cupcake as a weapon and that sort of thing. So I could have a lot more fun in the comics because there was a lot less pressure and a lot less kind of feedback to consider. So I probably had one or two people giving feedback from Crystal on the comics, whereas with the game there's like layers and layers of people giving feedback from the team, from external contractors, from publishers, and what have you. So it was kind of, I had more freedom with the comics to do the things I wanted to do, and that was delve into kind of her backstory, her relationships as well, but still do really fun stuff like the obstacle course in the British Museum that she runs at the start of my arc, and I really love that. And I went to the British Museum with a camera, and I photographed like, okay, I think she could those are where the stats, so it's drawn.
That's such a fun trip.
I gave the artist photographs of like, this is the route she's going to take through the museum, and I gave the artist photographs of where the statues were, where she was going to bounce off a crypt, that sort of thing. So there's real serious research that went into that start scene, and that was kind of really really fun to do. And I really love the cover for that comic because she looks happy and she's
Yeah.
grinning, and she doesn't often look that happy. So that was, I had a lot of fun with that.
There's one thing that I will always remember loving about the comics, and it's something that I think is only briefly mentioned as maybe like a little throwaway line in, I think it's in the Reboot game itself, when Roth mentions to her about when she was young and training in Snowdonia and on Snowdon.
Yeah.
Because I grew up really close to Snowdon, and it was like, oh my God, Tomb Raider's come home. And that was a wonderful little tidbit for me. I absolutely loved that.
Yeah, no. So I think we also had her and Reyes going mountain climbing as well. I think that was maybe at the start of the second run, and she's trying to teach Reyes the words to Monty Python's Rhubarb Tart song.
That's the one, yeah.
And that's what my dad taught me when we would go walking with and we would sing it in a round. And I don't think he taught me the right words, but it was, so it is. I liked putting in those like little real world tidbits, really.
When development for Rise of the Tomb Raider had concluded, what were your feelings on what you had achieved with Lara? Were you pleased with how she was realized in the game as opposed to just on paper?
Yeah, I was. I think we polished Lara. We polished things a lot with the second game. So I often think that the first game had more heart, but the second game had more polish. And partly that was due to the fact that we had a bigger team. So we went from being 2 people, myself and John, into 4 people for the core team of narrative folks on Rise. So it was myself, John Stafford, Cameron Sui and Philip Gillette working together on that, and we all had our different roles, and that all worked well, and we worked together well as a writer's room. And we also opened up the script very early on to feedback, which from a writer's perspective is terrifying because it's your first draft, you're so vulnerable, you're so narratively vulnerable, you're just trying to get your ideas down and shaping things. And you're also dealing with people that aren't used to reading first draft scripts, aren't used to reading scripts at all. And so you're dealing with all that. And it was Rise was in some ways harder than the first game because I think we had more focus, like intense focus on things, and everyone had an opinion about everything, and there were even more layers of feedback. So there was Microsoft factor in as well as Square Enix, and so lots of layers of feedback. And we opened up the script to feedback early on, and that was just continual headwind of feedback the whole time. Often the feedback would conflict, and so in the end, John had to like stand there and tank the feedback and just like filter through what we were gonna work on and what we weren't, like, because you can't do everything, especially because, as I say, it could be conflicting feedback and contradictory. So he had to kind of filter what we were going to work on and what we weren't. So it meant that we were kind of working and polishing and tweaking for a long time. And then part of the reason for that is the ending because we had ended up redoing the ending of Tomb Raider, the first Tomb Raider, quite late in the day and later than we would have wanted. We didn't want that to happen again. I'm not sure whether opening up the feedback to everyone was necessarily the best way of doing it, but it was certainly a way of doing it.
Do you think it may have been a case of too many cooks sometimes?
Oh, I mean, that's the case with games. Like when you're in the AAA game space, which is pretty much like studio pictures or blockbuster movies, you're always dealing with lots and lots of people. I think even more people, because I've written a number of screenplays now, and certainly in the development stage, you deal with far fewer people with movies than you do with development. But in development of games. But that's because with movie development, in the development stage, you may only have a few people you're working with. It sort of depends on whether your script has, financiers, whether there's a director attached. So you usually be working with maybe 3 or 4 people who could be sort of producers or kind of maybe a director if you're lucky. But in the development stage of a game, it's basically being built at the same time. So yeah, it's like writing a movie when the movie is being shot at the same time. So there's a lot going on. So there's a lot of feedback, and there's a lot of people having opinions. So, and that's not just something that happened on Tomb Raider. It's something that happens across the industry.
Well, next I want to talk a little bit about the Tomb Raider community and its fans with regard to Tomb Raider and Rise of the Tomb Raider and the entire series, really. Lara Croft has always had a massive LGBTQ plus following, and her relationship with her friends in the Reboot series, and Sam Nishimura in particular, has inspired her LGBTQ plus fans and allowed them to further relate to Lara. What are your thoughts on this influential aspect of the series, and how important or unimportant was expressing any form of sexuality when it came to writing Lara and her friends?
I mean, I think Crystal didn't really want to complicate things, or at least it was maybe kind of complicate things with Lara having a relationship within the game, because we were only dealing with a short period of time, and so it wasn't something that kind of we really thought about, because it wasn't particularly pertinent to what was going on in the game time space, which is only, as I said, it's only a couple of days. And I only really started thinking about it, I think, when I did the interview that became infamous, where I was talking with another LGBTQ journalist, and we were just having a discussion about that kind of representation in games, and it was all like very casual, and I sort of said, yeah, I would have loved to have made Lara gay, but and then I had to, and I said to him jokingly, oh, that's going to be a headline, isn't it? And I think he said, oh no, we're not Kotaku, and then it became the headline, and that was a little bit difficult for me, because it wasn't, it was just a tiny part of the conversation. It's absolutely true, but it's sort of the way it got framed was almost like I'd come in wanting to do this and had been crushed by evil Crystal, whereas it hadn't been much of a question for them at the time, and it was more like, yeah, I was completely open to it as a writer, and I would have been happy to do that if that's what the direction they wanted to take, but it wasn't something that they particularly factored in at the time, and it sort of got to the point where Crystal said they didn't want me to talk about Lara's sexuality or even Sam's sexuality. And I kind of had to adhere to that, but I did take notice of that, and how kind of meaningful it was to people in the shipping of Lara and Sam, and so I kind of did what I could. So I put a kind of openly gay character into the comics, in Kaz, who is Alex's sister, and I also have taken that realization that representation is meaningful to people on a really significant level into other things I do. So when I wrote the story for Attack on Titan, I had two lesbian teachers who were secret flying machine inventors who were building this flying machine under their classroom, and things like that, and so I've become a lot more aware, I think, of representation and how important it is to people since that, and I've tried to sort of take that knowledge forward with me in the stories and characters I build.
That's really cool. Have any fans approached you and talked to you about the impact your writing has had on them in terms of their sexuality?
Not specifically. Well, I do,
or even how it's helped them?
Maybe one, actually. I do have a friend who started reading shipping Sam and Lara stories, and sort of realized that she was gay. I won't name names, but it was just like, wow. I was really pleased about that. I was even though it was kind of only loosely linked to what I had done, but I was pleased that Lara and Sam were being interpreted in that way, and and I liked seeing fans having fun and putting their own significance on things. But yeah, I do know one person that was kind of affected by the larger kind of fan fiction community and realized that she was gay, which I think
really
she's affected for quite a while, but that it had an impact on her. So that was very cool. And hearing stories about how people have been affected by playing through Lara to change their life in some way for the positive, whether it's getting out of difficult relationship situations or really dark places, or even like going to the gym, and Lara certainly motivated me more to go to the gym. Hearing those stories and hearing that your work has affected someone positively in the real world is just the most wonderful feeling. Like you can't plan for it exactly, but it's just the best thing about what we do when you hear these stories about how people have been affected positively and that you've actually changed someone's life in some small way. It's just wonderful.
Winding down towards the end of the interview, just as a recap of your experience, what were your main or top 3 takeaways from your experience at Crystal Dynamics and your experience writing Lara?
Ooh, top 3 takeaways. I may have to think about that. The importance of a good team around you, I think, is probably number 1. I really had a great working relationship with John and Noah, and then that carried through onto Rise, and I'm still sort of in contact with all those guys, and that it's so important to have people around you that you can work with, that you can bounce ideas off. That's a great thing. You're not sort of doing it in a vacuum. You have other writers there, other narrative professionals, and that is really important. And I do actually think that the importance of representation as well was something I picked up from that, and as I say, I sort of carried it through, and I sort of realized it was maybe more important to people than I as a straight woman had realized, and it sort of that changed me, and it changed how I approach stories moving forward, and wanting them to kind of represent more diversity and put something in there for everyone, because it's meaningful and important. So I think that's 2. What is the second one? It took me a while to just recover from AAA, not exactly burnout, but Rise was pretty intense, and it was a very because of all the feedback early on, and constantly rewriting and tweaking and polishing, and the great thing is that we won a Writers Guild Award for it, so that was a nice
well done.
cherry on top. And that, so it was sort of I'd say it sort of burnt me out for AAA games for a bit, and that's sort of something I'm only just kind of going into, getting sort of back into again. So I sort of only worked on smaller games, or I focused on my film and TV work. So I think and how much I like writing comics when I get the opportunity, that definitely helped. That was definitely a takeaway, and I had in some ways more fun with the comics because I had more freedom to do things. And I could put my own vision in there a little bit more, whereas on games you're always having to share your vision with other people. That's just how it works. That's just what you have to deal with. So yeah, I think the importance of a good team, the importance of representation, and what was my last point? Whatever my last point was, that was my third one.
Okay, finally, if you could send Lara off on another adventure, if you were given complete free rein to do wherever you like, where would you love to send her?
Oh, I was thinking about this actually. I think I'd like to delve more into fictional places. Like I'd like her to maybe become more of a cryptoarchaeologist. So things like Atlantis. Because I love underwater stuff.
Yeah.
Because I'm an advanced open water diver, and I love.
Oh wow!
So I really love to do kind of, more underwater Lara action, not just swimming, but using submersibles and going into aquatic caves and cities and things like that. So I would like to kind of take her to more fictional places to have fun with. I think that would be pretty cool.
So thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me.
And we wish you all the very best with all of your future projects. And thank you for what you've done for Tomb Raider.
Oh, thank you. No, it's been a privilege and an honour.
If you enjoy Raidercast, don't forget to like and subscribe. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook at RaidercastPod and Instagram at Raidercast. Until next time, keep safe, keep happy, keep raiding.